Alrighty guys, welcome on into a new episode here on the Goo Review. You wanna say hi? Oh, here's the big mans. Here's the big mans. Huh? How you been? You been a good boy? Yeah. He was very excited about this week's movie review. We're actually looking at a trilogy, you guys. He enjoys werewolf movies, I like to think. Because he always, perks up and watches them and whatnot. So I guess he's just going to hang out here for a little bit. So, for today's video, we're taking a look at Ginger Snaps, the entire trilogy. Now, this movie is very close to my heart. They are older, so, nothing wrong with that. They're not, like, old. But this trilogy, more so specifically, like, the second and first movies were so, like, foundational to my childhood, I'm not gonna lie. I grew up with them. I watched the second one first on, like, the Sci-Fi Channel randomly one weekend, and then years and years later found the first one. But, yeah. Hi, baby. I love this movie so much. It's always been very kind of important to me. I even have a tattoo of Ginger, so if that says, how much I love this movie, there's that. Wanna hop down, Bubba's? So, yeah, quick content warning for this entire video, but more specifically for the entire series in general. Self-harm, suicide, drug addiction, drug use, just physical violence in general. It is a pretty gory movie, and for some reason, unfortunately, in the first and second movie, a lot of dogs die. You don't see it. You don't ever see it. You see some of the aftermath of it, but fair warning. And you know what? It's hard for me to watch. A lot of them are Rottweilers for some reason. I have a feeling they had the one, fake dead dog, and so they just kept reusing it, but a lot of Rottweilers. So if I can get through it, I think you guys can. Pretty gnarly kill right in the beginning where a kid finds their family dog, like, torn up. It's brutal. Yeah, like, it's a gory movie. Just a heads up. I think it's worth it. So, the very first of this trilogy, just the original Ginger Snaps, came out in 2001. Now, this is a interesting year for horror, specifically American horror, because there's this shift from otherworldly kind of like horror that is outside of ourselves. And then once the early 2000s, specifically post 9/11 time period, the movies shifted towards horror in the home, horror within your area, like much closer to you personally. It also, that's when like Hostel, man-on-man horror became more popular. But it came out in October, so it was filmed and all that obviously before 9/11, but it still has those post 9/11 horror like vibe to it because it takes place so closely centered around the home. It is also a Canadian film. Been doing this for a little decent amount of videos now. We've only done one American film. It's good. It's good, okay? And there was rumors that there was going to be a TV show as well based off of the Fitzgerald sisters with the original actresses. I don't know if that's still happening, though. I really don't, but we'll see. I would like it to. So, the movie is starring Emily Perkins as Bridget Fitzgerald.
United against life as we know it.
Catherine Isabelle as Ginger. And you might recognize Emily Perkins. She was in, like, Juno. That's really all I can recall in my mind that she was in. She also played in the original It. The original, the TV series made into a movie. She plays Beverly. Ain't that interesting? And Seth Green plays, like, which one is it? I don't know, but it's a lot of interesting faces in that one. Catherine Isabelle, she was in Freddy vs. Jason. I mean, in my mind, she will always be Ginger Fitzgerald. So, Chris Lemch, I think, as Sam.
Well, officer, looked like a lycanthrope to me, sir.
The, like, love interest, but not love interest. And then Mimi Rogers as Pam Fitzgerald, their mom.
Well, I've had just about enough of that tone.
Well, that makes two of us.
Fuck.
She is honestly such a highlight for this movie. She really is. She's like the comedic relief, but she's also the heart that this movie really needed, because she kind of ties everything together in a really nice and very endearing way. And I'm kind of bummed that, at least within the second movie, we didn't hear anything else of Pam. You know, we don't know what happened to her. But it only grossed about 570,000 USD in the box office. Not that great, considering that these movies had to have had like quite a budget, but that was the highest amount that these movies grossed. I believe the second one might have gone out to straight to DVD. The third one definitely. So, but it does have a massive, and I mean massive, cult following. So, aged like fine wine. The premise of the first movie is death-obsessed sisters, outcasts in their straight-laced suburb, must deal with the tragic consequences of a werewolf bite in this chilling coming-of-age drama. Now, the coming-of-age part, perfect way to describe it, because it mixes that, like, sexual awakening and, you know, becoming that, like, physical adult. Mix that with the horrors of becoming a werewolf too. It's just like, it's so perfectly done, and it's intertwined so well. And I noticed, we'll get to each one and like what each movie I think represents, but for me, this very first one is about like just sexual awakening in general. So with that, let's jump right in. I'm not going to go plot for plot for all the movies, because that will take us forever. So we're just going to kind of run through like the basic themes and whatnot of each of the movies. They are also all available to watch on Tubi for free. There are limited ads, but it's for free. So, but you can watch all three of them on there. I highly, highly recommend it, you guys. I really do. It's such a good movie. And I wouldn't say, like, the first one, it's not necessarily super, super scary. There are definitely some scenes, but it's not like terrifying. The second one, it takes such a tonal shift. Like, all of the kind of remnants of childhood's like gleefulness, it's all completely gone. The second one is such a different vibe, but I love it for that. So yeah, just the sisters are completely ostracized kind of within their community, within their school, because they're like death obsessed. The entire community is nonchalant towards death when it happens, but like if you're embracing of it, then you're, you know, it's too much. But at the same time, like, all of the boys at school like sexualize Ginger as well, because there's this whole scene where the girls are just obsessed with death, and for a school project they created photos of different ways that like they could die. Of course, everyone was like, oh, let us see the photos of Ginger again. So like, it's still highly sexualized, you know, but it's pushed down and it's not talked about, which repression, I think, comes in the later movies as well. And yeah, very quickly on in the first movie, you get that the mother is like a real ray of light in the film. She's the comedic relief, but she's also like the heart of it, because while Bridget and Ginger, who, you know, they're endearing, they really are, there's still that like coldness to them, you know, because they're so obsessed with death, or at least Ginger is. You know, Bridget is the younger one, even though Emily Perkins, the actress that played her, was older than Catherine Isabel at the time. So whatever, but it just has so much soul to it for being a werewolf movie, and I feel like that is usually a lot of the times like one of the biggest issues that people have with werewolf movies, is that it's usually pretty just like shallow. It is what it is. But this one, I think it has like a lot of depth to it. Also, like, as the story continues, Pam, their mother, like, you grow a fonder appreciation for how much she tries and whatnot, and you realize how much she blames herself. And Bridget, her character, sees that, and like, you know, there's that appreciation that I think comes along later in life, you know, usually not in your teen years, but Ginger, she's the one that's attacked by the werewolf, is thrusted into this adulthood and this like new identity. I also think there's like a generational effect that kind of has happened. So like, even though it's a house of women, it's Ginger, Bridget, and their mom, it's also their dad there. And he somehow, even though he's the only man, he controls like the discussion, like the narratives, what happens when they're specifically all sitting around the kitchen table. Because he's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, blah, blah, blah. Even though it's like important stuff for a teenage girl to learn about from their mother, you know, stuff pertaining to puberty and things like that. And it's also just like a societal and generational kind of like suppression of these certain topics, which only makes the people going through it like even more scared, you know? So the werewolf attack that happens, it happens at night while the girls are out trying to pull this prank on Trina, this girl that they don't like. And Ginger is attacked by the werewolf right as she gets her first period. Ironically enough, they notice the blood dripping down her leg, and she says, B, I just got the curse.
I just got the curse. Ew.
Like the whole werewolf thing, and it, like I said, it happens throughout the entire movie where you're not sure if like they're really talking about a werewolf or her just, you know, experiencing puberty. But it also, like, the werewolf is obviously symbolic of that jump into adulthood. The werewolf relies on a monthly moon cycle, just as a woman's menstrual cycle does. Like, the similarities, you guys. It's kind of hitting you over the head with it. Now, this is also a little bit ironic. Ginger is extremely protective, almost possessive to some extent over Bridget, and yet Bridget is always the one having to save Ginger. Just something I thought was interesting. Ginger does survive the werewolf attack. Of course, it's bloody, it's traumatic for her, and they get home and they're figuring it out and whatnot. And a change is very quickly noticeable between Bridget and Ginger. Just their emotional connection, it's already entirely different, as like Ginger takes the first steps into adulthood, and Bridget is still the meek little girl. And while like the movie continues, Ginger starts getting into activities that she wouldn't normally be interested in, specifically related to like boys and their attention. Bridget, who isn't seeking validation through any of that stuff, seems to find the only man worth a damn in the whole town. Sam, he's a very good character, especially because yes, there are times where you think maybe this is a romantic thing. I think that's the viewer's projection, because there's nothing that leads to the idea that Sam wants that type of relationship with Bridget. He's just helping her out. So, but yeah, that eventually really pisses off Ginger, because Bridget is now receiving attention from a boy without having to do all the things that Ginger has had to do to get, you know, lesser attention from lesser guys. Throughout a lot of the movie, like, they just kind of hint between, like, you're not sure, are they talking about puberty or are they talking about this curse, this, you know, the werewolf bite and all that. Ginger is like, well, I didn't get bit by some big giant hormone. So, you know, like, there's confusion for the characters, but also for the audience. Like, it treads the line of reality, and is it this fantasy world sometimes, even though, like, you saw what happened. And the scene with the school nurse is absolutely incredible. It's one of those ones that just, like, solidifies this movie as, like, such a camp classic, in my opinion, because it's just like, how do you get any more, like, kind of meta than that? Like, they are directly talking about these symptoms of her becoming a werewolf to this school nurse, and the school nurse is just like, that's completely normal for your first time, honey. It's such a beautiful scene. It's so good. She's like, there's so much blood and hair. And the school nurse is like, It's so funny. Also, this is the only werewolf movie out there where I have seen partial transformation, like when someone isn't a werewolf and they're still partially slowly turning into it. A tail. Ginger grows a tail, all right, and eventually she's duct taping it down her leg. But it's such a good scene, and it'll blow your socks off, dude, because you're so not freaking expecting it to just see a tail on her. And I actually love how anatomically correct they kind of get, like, the werewolf transformation. At one point towards the end of the film, Ginger has 6 breasts. So now, I don't necessarily like that they're showing what is supposed to be a teenage girl, like topless and whatnot, but 6 boobs, like, that's incredible for a werewolf movie. It's incredible. It's all prosthetics, so, like, you're not actually seeing anything, but it also kind of explores, it blatantly explores, like, the dangers of STDs, different situations that come up with, like, teenage sexual awakening. It also goes into, like, sexuality and violence and how that develops, and also kind of playing into, like, the dangers of childhood coming to an end, which is, like, it's an inevitability, but there are dangers associated along with it. And this movie is kind of like, well, which sister avoids those dangers and which sister goes towards them heads on, you know? I know that, like, I say this movie sounds, like, pretty graphic and disturbing. It is, but it is honestly the perfect blend of horror and comedy. It mixes so perfectly that the first film in the trilogy, it just has such a different emotional carry to it. It's a lot more joyful, even though the ending is extremely sad. It just has a completely different vibe to it. It really, really does. I mean, the comedy is paired hand in hand with the gore, with the horror of it all. They accidentally kill a girl in their kitchen and her blood is all over the place, and their parents come home before they can clean it up, and they make it look like they were just filming or taking pictures for another school project. The mom, like, they stuff the girl in the freezer out in the garage, and the mom's going to put meat away, and Bridget, to distract her, just thinks up, "Mom, what do you guys want?" And it's just so funny. It's just so funny, all right? This first one also, it kind of dives into, like, self-mutilation as well. Ginger tries to cut off her own tail, and it explores that even more so in the second one. I mean, it's justified through the werewolf means, but it obviously is a call to certain things. We'll get into that. But there is that aspect to it. There is also the aspect of drug use. They take the monkshood, this plant, and wolfsbane. They turn into an injection. And so there's needles and stuff like that. So it's alluding to drug use as well. And just as the movie continues, we see that Ginger's unchecked emotions and, like, this fury within her is hurting everyone around her, including Bridget. It sounds a little corny, but, like, Bridget kind of finds her worth away from Ginger and kind of officially declares that the pact is over. Bridget said, like, or I always said I would die with you, and Bridget responds back with, like, no, you said you would do it because you had nothing better to do, or something like that. So, like, there has never been an equal emotional match up with these two sisters, you know? Ginger has always kind of been the domineering one. She controls Bridget, but at the end of the day, like, it seems like Bridget also controls her. It's a weird kind of codependent relationship that they have, and you see it unravel. But Bridget does end up infecting herself with Ginger's blood in an attempt to save her, but it doesn't, you know, work out that way. And even once the transformation happens, Ginger fully transforms and she actually kills Sam. She even guides Bridget and kind of like shows her what to do in this new werewolf state. But Bridget still like fights against it, and she fights her sister and ends up killing Ginger. It's a very sad scene. It's a very sad ending. But I noticed that while I would say Bridget is more so kind of like the main character, the story follows her point of view specifically. We see that Ginger is the one that leads the plot. None of the events that happen in the movie would have happened without Ginger. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting role that these two play, and they almost share like the main character status, even though I think they're a little bit different. But yeah, so that's the first movie, and that one is, I believe, symbolic of like a sexual awakening, whereas the second one is sexual repression. So let's get into it. Oh, by the way, I completely forgot to mention it. The first one is directed by John Fawcett. The second one is directed by Brett Sullivan. They all have different directors, and that shows very much different styles between all three of them. So the second one came out in 2004, and the third one also came out in 2004. That was just a quick right to release. And this one focuses more on like the real world horrors of adulthood, more specifically addiction and stuff like that. The little synopsis for this one: imprisoned in a rehab clinic, a female werewolf, Bridget, fights to keep her transformation at bay while planning an escape with an eccentric fellow patient. Now, this is the first movie that I ever saw, and I actually really loved Ghost growing up. Loved her character. It took me a little bit later watching this as I got older to realize what Ghost was in the film. She's one of those characters that you hate to love. And yeah, so this one is starring Emily Perkins as Bridget Fitzgerald once again. Ginger does make a few cameos, so she comes in every now and then. Tatiana Maslany as Ghost.
What are you dropping, huh? Come on, get out of here.
She does an incredible job. And Eric Johnson as Tyler, who is a sexually abusive nurse, I guess. Janet Kidder as Alice.
Where did you say Beth Ann is?
She's like the rehab facility head person. Box office, it got about 80,000 USD. Because I know this one was expensive. And once again, content warning for this one: drug use, sexual assault, self-harm, addiction, moderate gore, and unfortunately more dead dogs. So this movie takes a major tone shift. You'll notice it right in the beginning. Major tone shift. Very dark, very early 2000s horror, you know? It's like just very blue and green kind of undertones, very dark. Even the werewolf design for this movie is so much scarier than the Ginger werewolf. And we'll get into that at the end, what I think of the different werewolf designs and whatnot, because that is important for a werewolf movie. Very important. In my opinion, that will make or break the film, is how good the werewolf design is. So it opens up on Bridget, and she's in this crusty, nasty motel, having to self-medicate for the lycanthropy, I guess. She's a werewolf. So she's still self-medicating with the injections, and it very closely similars drug use, guys, so it might be triggering to watch. Band on arm, biting down on a toothbrush, like it's graphic. It's very graphic, and obviously is paralleling substance abuse and pushing others away into like this life of solitude. We don't know anyone in her life from the first movie that follows into this one, and anyone new that tries to get close, she very quickly pushes them away, and just shows her trying to, like, she's literally running from her own beast inside, being addiction and sexual repression. I believe we're going to get into that, and it's resulting in self-harm. So great jump scares in this one. This one is definitely scarier, you guys, okay? So the first one is like Yeah. The second one and the third one, much scarier. Total tone shifts. And we will read reviews at the very end. I didn't want to mix it all in and whatnot. A lot of people, for some reason, thought that this was a family movie or a good movie to watch with the family. Not the case. Not even the first one. As lighthearted as I say it kind of is, it's still not. It's not. It's not. It's rough. It's rough. I don't recommend this for a family movie night unless your kids are like teenagers. Then it's the perfect movie. But also in this one, you get more on-screen werewolf. In the first one, it's just when Ginger is attacked and then Ginger at the very end. You don't get much werewolf in between. And if that is like your main thing, you'll like this one more because the werewolf shows up more. Bridget in this one is having to run from a werewolf that's tracking her down to try and mate with her. So this like impending like kind of doom related to sex or heteronormative sex that it leaves Bridget running. She's running for her life from this thing, which she is a werewolf. So like you'd think naturally she'd be down, but no, she's running away from this thing that she is and also self-medicating to run away from it further. I think she's a lesbian, and they hint at this in the movie. Okay, so I think that level of sexual repression that Bridget's character is experiencing is related to her sexual identity and sexual orientation, and that coming into question. Also, historically, werewolves and monsters and stuff like that have been a great stand-in and allegory for queer people specifically. So I think it plays into that. I think the underlying kind of message that isn't said but is said if you pay attention is that Bridget does not have interest in like performing along with this heteronormative narrative that is set place in our world, and her trying to repress that down is leading to this self-harm, substance abuse, and whatnot. You get that? Does that make sense? And now, I watched all of these yesterday. I just sat down with Goo and we watched them, binged them all, because I love these movies so much, you guys. I actually watch Ginger Snaps, like, monthly, I would say. Once or twice a month. Just, like, put it on in the background. I love this movie. But, in the beginning, I wasn't too sure what the third movie could represent. If the first one is sexual awakening, and the second one is sexual repression, it took me a while to kind of get to that. But when I was watching the second one, I came up with just like a little hypothesis that the third one would be, where did the repression begin? Now, if you know anything about the third one, it's a period piece. It takes place in like the 17 or 1800s. So maybe. But I think I found my answer once I dove more into the third one. And it does another great job of paralleling what it's supposed to represent. So like when Bridget is talking to Alice a lot in her therapy sessions, it very much closely, like Alice just thinks she's talking to another addict. You know, she's like, I've been where you are. I know what you're feeling. And Bridget's like, I promise you don't. It plays into that. Just like the nurse scene in the first movie, the second movie also treads that line of like, it's odd, like we know that Bridget is going through something that isn't this, but it looks too closely to that. And she was also self-harm trigger. She cuts her legs and her arms. It looks very much like self-harm cuts. It's in order for her to time how quickly they heal so she can tell how soon, like, she's apparently going to transform. There's explanation for it that makes sense in the realm of this movie, but in context to the real world, we know what it's supposed to be getting at. Ghost, however, who is a child in the clinic, because her grandmother was very badly, severely burned, so she just kind of lives there now.
Hey, BB.
She is the only one that believes Bridget that she's a monster, you know, not that, oh, she's just an addict. She believes her. And this relationship, it gets kind of twisted as it goes because you very quickly see how, I mean, Bridget is still mourning the loss of her sister, and Ghost is all about, well, I always wanted a sister. So Bridget kind of stands in for that, and Ghost, instead of Ginger's protectiveness of Bridget, Ghost becomes extremely possessive of Bridget by the end of the film. She keeps her locked in her fucking basement as a werewolf. She didn't have Bridget's interest in mind. She just wanted that, like, power, you know? And Bridget's sexual desires also playing into the addiction. I think it's like the addiction comes from the suppression of the sexual desires that she experiences. And even one of the nurses in the clinic, like, writes down on her board, lesbian, question mark. So that's it. They get at it. And, like, they're not just saying it to make a joke, you know, it's there for a reason. This is one of those movies that you can look at as just like early 2000s, like kind of standard run-of-the-mill horror. But I think there is a deeper kind of underlining thematic device to it. I don't know. But yeah, there's multiple hints to Bridget's sexuality throughout the movie, which leads back into that repression. And there is some sex in this movie. It's because Tyler, the nurse or orderly, he carries like all of the drugs and whatnot. So he requests sexual favors from the girls for them to get those drugs, which obviously bad. But they get their comeuppance. Like, obviously, if you have sex in a horror movie, you're going to die. And a girl, another patient there, she dies in the basement from her addiction. It's her addiction that killed her. If she didn't have an addiction to something, she wouldn't have been in the basement where the werewolf is and gotten attacked. And this is where I kind of made the connection in my mind that in this movie, the beast is addiction. In the second or the third movie, the beast is tradition. Tradition is what kills people in the third movie. So we'll get there. You also see that like Bridget's desire to get her drug of choice leads her to desperate measures to inject it or get it into her system. She has to drop it into her eye at one point. She also licks it up off of the ground. Like, you see that desperation, you know? Also, this is very quickly talked about, but I picked it up that Ghost's grandma was actually in therapy for suppressed emotions. So it's playing into that. Like, why would the grandma be going to that? And why would they even feel the need to address that? Unless it was, you know, directly linking to Bridget's experience now. And while Bridget is repressing her own kind of like sexual desires and feelings, Ghost is repressing actual information and lying and manipulating to do her best to keep Bridget. She even... What I will assume happens is Ghost falsely accuses Tyler of touching her. And that leads to Tyler's death because he gets left outside with the werewolf. But Bridget very quickly finds out that that wasn't the case. Ghost is cuckoo, okay? She kills Alice. Like, she'll do anything to make sure that Bridget stays hers. So it's almost kind of like a weird... kind of lesbian relationship, but it's not. Ghost is supposed to be a kid, so. But Bridget is also, like, very much in the same sense, still kind of, like, mentally very childish. Yeah, I don't want, like I said, I don't want to go through the plot entirely, but it ends with Ghost in her perfect fantasy world, this world that she built up entirely in her comics. She's now created as like a reality where she is this werewolf queen. But yeah, so that's that one. Now let's go on to the third one. This one is called Ginger Snaps Back, The Beginning, also released in 2004, and this one was directed by Grant Harvey. After surviving a shipwreck, sisters Ginger and Bridget wander to a remote Canadian outpost under assault from werewolves. Now, if you love a period piece, oh, you're gonna love this one. And it's even darker than the second one. Not in like thematics, I guess, but just visually, it's a very dark, Honestly, I'm gonna say it feels cozy. The movie is very cozy to me. Everything's lit by candles. It's just very much like cozy. But of course with werewolves and deformed kids. It is a period piece, which, ironic, kind of, so is the first one if you really think about it. Once again, Catherine Isabelle plays Ginger, Emily Perkins plays Bridget, Nathaniel Arkand plays the Hunter.
I stay because it is my will to stay.
Hugh Dillon plays Reverend Gilbert.
Your sin brought the devil upon it.
Horrible. Arguably way worse than the werewolves. J.R. Bourne plays James.
A toast to our magnificent Indian friend here.
Now, you might recognize him. He played the werewolf hunting dad in the MTV version of Teen Wolf. If you know, you know. Brendan Fletcher, he plays Finn, and you will notice him also in the first movie. He dies pretty quickly. He has such a long-running history with horror. He was in Freddy vs. Jason, so like that's where I know him from. But he is in both of these, so it's nice to see him pop up, and he has more of a role in the third movie. He's gonna pop in again and say hi. You're probably just as big as those werewolves. You know that? Yeah, you big beast. Hi, Papas. Hi. Yeah, you liked these movies, huh? Didn't you? So, the third movie opens talking about a plague or an infection affecting generations. So, right off the bat, we're getting into like generational trauma. We're seeing where the repression in the second movie kind of all originally stems from. If we want to think about it historically in this country, at least, or maybe on this landmass, the people that came over and colonized the land and the people here, they had a certain way of thinking. If you think of like the Puritans, it's that type of mentality of like repressing things down, and we still have that in this country today. Our country is not open as much when it talks about like the nuances to sexuality or sexual behavior in general. It pushes that down. It likes to push down topics of drug abuse and stuff like that, sexual assault. So it's this like long-seated repression within our country that stems from its very formation. The natives represent, I mean, they are used in that like kind of unfortunately stereotypical horror way of like the natives are the mystics, like they bring all the answers mystically for the main characters. So there's that, but the natives also, I think, represent information passed down from ancestors, because while the settlers, all their information, it's all written down and whatnot, the information from the natives, it's much older, it's much more personal because it's told by word of mouth. So you see like those kind of similarities and differences. And they also do a lot of talking about necessary evils in the world, but like a necessary evil is something that's entirely subjective, I think, to the time period. Another character, I believe, Adrian Dorval, he plays Seamus.
Let them come.
He had a wife and a child, but the wife was native, and unfortunately the wife died, and then the son allegedly died as well. It's kind of that like breaking of tradition and what could befall upon you if that happens, you know? This movie also, like, it's kind of gross, I'm not gonna lie. Heavy misogyny, and just like, I mean, there's a reverend in it, so in the 1800s, you can imagine. And all of that energy, unfortunately, is focused towards Ginger and Bridget. They're the only females in the entire encampment. So it also very heavily kind of shows that the Reverend feels insecure from like his own sexuality when confronted with these two girls, and he takes that out on them. I mean, he tries to kill them right up. So, and he's just horrible, dude. He's horrible. He is easily the worst freaking character in this entire series. Oh my god. And also along the way, everything that happens and everything that kind of falls upon this encampment is because of them. It's their own lies that, you know, they're keeping from each other, their own wants and desires that are ultimately going to lead them to their demise. But, of course, they blame it on the newcomers, even though it's them themselves. Interesting. There's a lot of hypocrisy in this last final installment. Also, such a badass scene when Ginger comes back into the camp. We're flying through this one, guys. If you really want the juicy details of it, please watch the movie. I promise it's worth it. But the third one, it's also like basically the first movie retold through a period piece, but with a kind of different, more ending. It's a happier ending in this one, I will say that. At least the sisters stay together. But it does lead you to think that, oh, she's going to have to kill her sister again. It alludes to Bridget still becoming a werewolf with Ginger, but this time with her. And so it was the two sisters, like, against the world, essentially. Which, I love that ending more. It seems like the ending that Bridget and Ginger deserved in the first one. But there is a scene where Ginger comes back and she opens up the gates and just werewolves, like, fly in past her. And it gives you the exact same imagery that Ghost had in her comics. So, like, Ginger kind of becomes what Ghost wanted to be. I just loved it. I also think this movie plays into, like, new traditions taking over old ones. And, yeah, I think it kind of gives, like, it seems out of place and random. Like, why would they go and do that? But if you think about it in terms of kind of the entire series up to this point has been about repression, specifically sexual repression, which is kind of like a Western or Americanized social aspect. Like in Europe, it's not as a taboo thing to talk about. Here, though, it's very different, and clearly in Canada as well, I guess. That repression coming through all of them, it makes sense that the third one would be like, okay, let's look at where that repression began and kind of like the beasts that comes along with that. Speaking of beasts, let's talk about the werewolf design. So the first one, the Ginger Wolf, it's very kind of otherworldly for a werewolf costume, I guess. Very, very little hair, kind of very gross looking, sickly almost. But it is scary, in my opinion. As the movies continue on and they get scarier and darker, I would say the scariest werewolf is in the second one. You don't see it a lot in, like, bright lights, but when you do, it's scary. It's scary, and seeing it dimly lit, too, is terrifying. The third one, I love that we get more werewolves. So each time now it's only been one werewolf and like one partially transformed human, but now we have a whole horde of werewolves and they're just running through this camp, like tearing people apart. It's a gore fest. It's a bit much, but it's kind of like the perfect crescendo for this trilogy. And yeah, the werewolves in the third one, they more closely resemble like the werewolves in Underworld, in my opinion. That's not a bad thing. They're still all done practically, so no CGI effects. That's one thing about this series that I freaking love so damn much. They don't use CGI. It's all practical effects for everything, so it looks so freaking good. Once again, guys, I highly recommend this series, like, more than probably any movie I'll talk about. Swear to God. I love this series so much. So with that, we're going to read the top positive and top critical review for each of the films. First one is the first, Ginger Snaps. So the top positive review says, werewolf as metaphor. This is a long one, you guys. Ginger and Bridget Fitzgerald are sisters, incredibly close and fascinated with death. They are also complete outcasts at their school because of their weird attitudes and photo projects of their mock deaths. There have been a rash of neighborhood dogs being killed, so Bridget decides to play a joke on a bitchy classmate who shoved her into a dead dog. The plan goes awry when the creature killing the dogs attacks Ginger seconds after getting her first period. Ginger survives the attack. Her wounds immediately start to heal at a rapid pace. After the attack, Ginger's behavior changes drastically. She shows interest in boys, smokes pot, exhibits extreme mood swings, and starts to physically change. Bridget watches her sister in disbelief and is convinced she's turning into a werewolf. Can she convince her sister and find a cure before it's too late? Anyone who knows me well knows that I go through obsessions with books and movies. I will reread or watch things I really enjoy repeatedly over a period of months sometimes. I can relate to that. This is one of my obsessions. Agreed. This film has just enough camp/cheese, suspense, and good story to be the perfect movie. I love the fresh take on werewolves. I usually seriously hate werewolves because it reduces good characters to competing in pissing contests in the pack and being extremely moody and annoying. See the Anita Blake series and the Twilight Saga. Not good representations of werewolf films. Women are generally not in positions of power in the pack and are treated as inferior or as property, which really makes me angry. This film, thankfully, has no werewolf pack and has a fresh interpretation of werewolves. The Hollywood vision of werewolves transforming at the full moon and being defeated by silver bullets is abandoned. The focus is on transformation of a teenage girl into a werewolf in the span of a month, as an allegory for womanhood and growing up. The animalistic behavior shown physically through her slow transformation into a wolf. The animalistic behavior represents the bodily urges of a young woman. She becomes a different person, as one should in transition from childhood to adulthood. This is shown physically through her slow transformation into a wolf. Bridget, since she is still a child, is completely terrified by the transformation. She tries everything she can to stop it, but the advancement in the cycle of life is inevitable. The acting is great, the sisters are completely believable and creepily close at the outset of the film. I personally related to the girls, who didn't feel isolated or misunderstood in high school. Catherine Isabel as Ginger carries the film well in her change in mood and demeanor as the film progresses. The effects are surprisingly well done, despite being an indie film. There is a lot of blood and gore, plus the deaths of about 4 dogs. That's just in the first movie. The director opted to use prosthetics and makeup to achieve Ginger's transformation, which I think worked wonderfully. CGI would have looked way too fake and dated the film. True. The changes are at first understated, not even recognized by the characters. It's not until later in the film that the viewer realizes that the small changes have added up and drastically changed her appearance. I like that she looked oddly beautiful even in the late stages of her change. She got sexy, I'm not gonna lie. When she's got the 6 nipples, it's hot. I feel wrong for saying that, but it is. Like, it's supposed to be weirdly attractive. The main musical theme is so hauntingly beautiful, featuring a cello in the melody. Similar themes in the movie are nice, but there are some laughably cheesy moments because of other musical motives. I think the cheesier moments were intentionally poking fun at the teen horror genre. The climactic face-off at the end of the film between Bridget and werewolf Ginger was so suspenseful. The first time I watched it, I couldn't look away and I was on the edge of my seat. There really isn't anything I don't like about Ginger Snaps. One can definitely see its effect in recent cinema, especially in Teeth and, unfortunately, Jennifer's Body. Yes, if you like Jennifer's Body, you will love this movie. I think Ginger Snaps is what Jennifer's Body really wanted to be. Don't diss Jennifer's Body, okay? I don't think they're comparable, but Jennifer's Body is equally as such a great camp classic. I hope the tradition of genocentric horror films continues. So that's that one. Now we will see the most critical, which sounds dumb. It sounds like a dumb one. Not family friendly. What the hell were you thinking? But this is the lowest rated one. It still has 3 stars. So I think only 2%. Yeah, it says 2% gave it 1 star. So it has 4.7 out of 5 stars. Highly, highly rated. Not family friendly because of language and excessive gore. It also treats teen suicide frivolously as something humorous. It romanticizes it, yes, but I don't see that as a bad thing. Like, it very quickly shows how that is a bad thing to do. I watched Ginger Snaps the beginning last night and liked it. Liked it enough to watch this one, which I believe is the first. Yeah, see, completely different movies. I was disappointed. The acting in this one was almost as good as in the other. Bridget's character is more dynamic and deeper in the beginning than in this one. Well, yeah. Also, there's not really a story here, and what story there is has gaps. Example, who cleaned up the girl's house after the blood fest? And what happened to the mother at and after the party? Valid. After bringing her more actively into the plot, she disappears from the story. I think there were probably some scenes that got deleted along the way. The movie as a vehicle for the story was good. Good cinematography, good settings, good story flow and dialogue. The makeup, Ginger transforming, was not bad, but the special effects were not up to scratch. In what sense? There was nothing scary about the werewolf, so if you're in the mood for werewolves, this one isn't bad, not on part 2. Now on to part 2. What? Okay, that one didn't make much sense, I'll be honest. Okay, so this second one, this is another long one. First off, let me say, I like the werewolf drug withdrawal concept. I've never really had a problem with that anyway. I think it's interesting. I mean, it can bring Puppet Master puppets back. It can be the vampire version of Orpheus on Buffy or Angel. Loved how Faith used it, so blah, 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 blah. Oh my gosh, okay, we're just rambling. Also, Bridget is a wolf from the first movie because of that promise she did with Ginger where they both cut the palms of their hands and exchanged it. This I do with my husband and my friends, only with cutting our palm. What the fuck? Okay. This one's weird. Okay. got a more normal one. Oh my god. The film is interesting on two levels. First, it is a well-made sequel to Ginger Snaps, a cult horror classic about two sisters involved with werewolves. Emily Perkins continues her riveting performance as Bridget, trying to delay the onset of her werewolf infection while fleeing the attention of a male of the species. Ghost, a 13-year-old werewolf groupie, enters the story with delightfully unexpected consequences. On a second level, this film is fascinating because of its connections to Orphan Black. In her first major film role, 17-year-old Tatiana Maslany plays Ghost, and no surprise steals the picture. John Fawcett was an executive producer and later co-created Orphan Black. You can see similarities between the two producers in lighting, sound, and how tension is built in empty, dark scenarios. Fawcett has also stated his experience with Maslany on this film was a major factor in having her audition for Orphan Black. I'm going to have to check that movie out. I haven't heard of that one, and I really enjoyed her in this. So, we'll check that out. I'm going to be so for real with you guys. There's no negative reviews. There's not many. None that I can really, kind of pick apart. Okay, this one's a little bit more critical, but it still has 3 stars. So, Ginger Snaps was a good movie, but its sequel doesn't deliver. As so often happens, the sequel is just an attempt to cash in on the success of the original film and does not make a good continuation. I disagree. Ginger Snaps 2 is pretty much just an average horror film, merging the werewolf genre into the psychiatric hospital genre, like they couldn't figure out how to make it stand on its own as a werewolf film, with what the first film leaves us with. This was probably because Ginger Snaps was a complete film and didn't need a sequel. I don't think it needed a sequel, no, but they're carrying and developing this repressed kind of identity further, which I enjoy that. The first film has very specific themes about sisterhood, goths admiring death, the struggles of growing up, and feminist commentary. The second film remembers them fondly, but doesn't really do anything substantial with them or even with themes of its own. Wrong. Instead, meandering between Bridget remembering her relationship with Ginger, Bridget trying to make friends, and Bridget dealing with intimidating love interests with no clear point or message. The only thing coming close to a theme is the conflation of sex and violence, which has been with werewolf and vampire stories for ages, and it doesn't do anything interesting with it. Finally, the end twist is unsatisfactory because it doesn't respect the protagonist and has little to no build-up. I think that's fine. I think that's fine that there's no respect for Bridget in the end of the second one. I do. It's unfortunate. I enjoy that these movies don't have comfortable endings, They don't leave you feeling whole at the end. You feel just as empty as the characters do sometimes. The film leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. The first film is one of my favorite horror films, and this film degrades the characters and setting into an average horror film. Ginger is reduced to an evil mocking voice stereotype. Bridget doesn't really go anywhere and is ultimately disrespected by the ending. Love interests we are supposed to like are written as creepy and regressive portrayals of gender dynamics that stand in stark contrast to the feminist themes of the original. But I think Bridget's complete repulsion from that shows that she is very much different from this society she's kind of been picked up and dropped into. Surprise villains aren't thought out, and the twists show up more or less because someone thought the movie should have twists regardless of their suitability in the plot. It is a disrespect to the legacy of the first film. I wonder what they think of the third one then. Ooh, the third one's my least favorite, I'm not gonna lie, but it's still good. Once again, talking about it being a family movie, it's not a family movie. Questionable as a family movie due to violence towards women. That's what did it for you? Not the gore and people being shot and killed? Okay. I hadn't watched a werewolf movie in such a long time, and I found this one entertaining. It's not often you pull for the werewolf. The camera work, the setting, wardrobe were good. As for props, the guns on the 1815 Frontier would almost certainly have been flintlocks and not caplocks. That's such a nitpick. I love that though. The story was a bit slow, lagging in places where it seemed to struggle to find its pace. The makeup for the werewolves wasn't that good. Really? I thought the acting was good for the most part. The parts of the minister and the brute soldier were overdone, in my opinion. He does kind of play it like the Reverend in Hunchback of Notre Dame. And how likely would it be for the soldier, knowing she's a werewolf, to get close enough to Ginger for her to slice his jugular? The young ladies played well off each other. I haven't seen the other two Ginger movies, but I'll look them up. So if you're in the mood for werewolves, this one isn't bad. I think this one is more so for if you're a diehard fan of the series, you'll like this one because it's Ginger and Bridget, but it's very different. It's very, very different. And then this one, once again, 3 stars, so not that bad. Ginger Snaps is near the top of my werewolf movies list. The second one was weird, but good in its own way. I agree. This, though, suffers from cliches and a plodding pace. It's a period piece, 1800s, with some mystical Indians thrown in to try to add authenticity to it. But the legends are mixed up, the pacing is off, and there's a huge continuity disparity in how long the transformations take. It also has its Legolas, I don't know what that means, a character who can kill a dozen werewolves single-handedly. Okay, true. Well, if he's that tough, why have the werewolves been a problem to date? He does get killed, alright? But yeah, even this one has 68% 5 stars, so it still has 4.3 out of 5. That's still pretty good, in my opinion. So yeah, I definitely want to know your thoughts, guys. If you have seen this movie, definitely let me know, or any of these movies. If you haven't, and now you're interested, please watch them. They are so good. So good. And this video will probably make more sense to you. Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. I truly do appreciate it. I'm going to try to include some more clips and stuff into these as I go. Especially for this one, which kind of is a visual thing. I don't know. But yeah, definitely let me know some recommendations for any movies that you might want me to check out as well. Just kind of doing random ones as we go. If I see something online that I want to talk about, I'll do that one. Or if there's just I can't think of anything, then take a look at an old one that I really love. It's not always going to be the most newest, you know what I mean? Thank you so much for tuning in, you guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Like and subscribe. And I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.